What is the first thing you think of when you hear the phrase use of force by law enforcement? My name is Jessica Dudley, and today I'm going to be explaining the use of force by law enforcement and why it is so important. Like many of you, I have heard the countless stories and news videos that display officers using force. These videos often show the officers using hands-on tactics, tasers, pepper spray, and even firearms. What these news stories don't show is that what is going on before the officers had to use their force. The use of force is the amount of effort an officer must use on an unwilling individual. Law enforcement use their force to protect not only themselves, but also the communities they serve. I'm going to explain what the use of force is, the types of force used by law enforcement, and why this force is so important. Law enforcement officers effectively exercise their use of force in each individual situation they encounter. First, I'm going to talk about what the use of force is. The use of force by law enforcement is the amount of effort a law enforcement officer must use to control an unwilling individual. This can range from nonviolent to extremely violent. According to the National Institute of Justice, the use of force is defined as the amount of effort required by the police to compel compliance in an unwilling subject. Next, I'm going to talk about the types of force that are used by law enforcement. Bowman has created his use of force continuum to label these types of force on a scale that ranges from no force to lethal force. The first type is no force. This is officer presence, which can deter crime in certain events, such as at sporting events and concerts. Their actions are non-threatening, and also their attitudes are relatively positive and also non-threatening. The next type of force is non-physical force. This is verbalization. This can happen in a simple traffic stop, when the officer orders an individual to step out of a car or hand them their driver's license. The officer's voice is calm and non-threatening. Sometimes, when an individual starts to become a little uncompliant, the officer may use an increased volume in his voice to get the subject to comply with him without having to use a more severe type of force. Next is bodily force. There are two types of bodily force that law enforcement officers use. The first is their soft technique. This includes grabs, holds, and locks for restraint. This may happen if an individual becomes unruly at an event or even out on the street, and the officer needs to get him under control before he hurts himself, the officer, or others. The next is a hard technique. This includes punches, kicks, and anything similar to that. This technique is used when the grabs and holds are not working and the officer needs to get the individual under control. Sometimes this is used when an individual is strung out on drugs or has a very strong will, and the officer desperately needs to get him under control. The fourth type of force is non-lethal force. This includes tasers, batons, and pepper spray. These items are used when the officer's punches, kicks, grabs, and holds are not working at all. They don't want to use these, but oftentimes have to control a situation. Last is lethal force, and this includes firearms. Officers never want to have to use their firearm, but in certain situations they have to protect themselves and the communities around them. Lastly, I'm going to explain why the use of force is so important and necessary for officers. First, the use of force is necessary to control situations. Officers never know what kind of situation they are going to encounter when they are called out to a site, or even pull over a vehicle. Oftentimes, individuals can become very unwilling and want to fight back with the officer, so he must use force to protect himself and make sure that that individual that he's dealing with does not get too out of control. Next, individuals do not always comply and respond in a decent manner. This An example of this is when an individual is strung out on drugs. He will shout, and oftentimes become violent, and the officer needs to get him under control before he harms himself or the officer. Last, officers have the responsibility of caring for those in their community, protecting themselves and those they come in contact with. Officers never want to have to use lethal force or any type of force, but it is necessary to protect those around them and themselves. Hopefully, now you have a better understanding of law enforcement's use of force and why it is necessary they use the types of force they do. Now, when you watch a video or see a news story, hopefully you'll have a better understanding of why law enforcement officers are acting in the way they do. Law enforcement officers are not looking to use force in every situation, and they'd much rather handle the situation without use of force and in the most reasonable way possible. However, to do their job and protect and serve their communities, sometimes it requires them to use force and to get the situation under control. I have now defined use of force, explained the various types of force used by law enforcement, and why the use of force is so important. Law enforcement officers put their lives on the line every single day to protect and serve their communities, and in return, it's our job to back the blue. Thank you.